This last panel is about something that I know is on a lot of our minds lately. Is about an issue that has caused challenges in the election community unlike any we've seen before. And that's the issue of threats and harassment facing election officials. We've talked a lot about the disinformation. This is another one of those issues that disinformation is fueling. It is leading to an environment of harassment and isolation for tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of our fellow Americans who we rely upon to facilitate our democracy, to give us voice. And I'm really pleased to have such an outstanding panel up here today. It'll be moderated by Amy Gardner of the Washington Post. To her left is Secretary Shenna Bellows of the state of Maine. I'm going to skip over Natalie in the middle and come back to her in a second. We've got Bill Gates, who is a supervisor in Maricopa County, Arizona, and Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson of Michigan. I should say, if you look on your program, originally Gabe Sterling was supposed to be here. Gabe, unfortunately, tested positive for COVID, and he's on the mending side of that, thank goodness. But he couldn't be here, and like a second-string quarterback coming in the fourth quarter to throw the game-winning touchdown pass, we are joined by Natalie Adona, the Clerk-Recorder of Nevada County, California. So yes, exactly. So let's thank her for pitching in for Gabe. With that, I will hand it over to you, Amy, to take it from there.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks to all of you. Really glad to be here and see so many familiar faces. It's become a little bit of a cottage industry for all of us to gather several times a year and talk about the things that we wish weren't happening out in the country. I want to start by asking each of you to comment on the state of threats and intimidation and harassment in your state. And I'm going to ask Bill to go last because otherwise you'll steal the show. It seems to me that there was a lot of relief expressed after the 2022 elections among election officials and advocates for democracy and voting rights, et cetera, that some of the leading election deniers and purveyors of misinformation about the 2020 election, at least in statewide races, had lost. Carrie Lake, Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, the entire Republican ticket in Michigan, Mark Fincham also in Arizona, Jody Heiss in Georgia, and so there was relief. But I think now, 6-7 months later, we're all seeing evidence of things that are not going away as we head into 2024. We're hearing of intimidation and threats and the need for heightened security. And I just want to ask each of you, and I'll just start right with you, Secretary Bellows, to talk about what you're seeing in your state and what are you concerned about it right now as we head towards the presidential next year.
Thank you so much, Amy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you. I'm Shenna Bellows, Secretary of State for Maine, and I have to say I feel deep concern. I was talking with my local election clerks about this on Friday and about this very panel and what I might say. And one of my clerks said, would you please not identify my town? This is one of my clerks that experienced an election threat, a death threat that was successfully prosecuted. She said, I don't want to be harassed or threatened again.
And I'm really glad that you told me ahead of time because I was going to put the name of the town in my question to you.
So I think this is just case in point, right? That we should be able to have this conversation, but the conversation itself is creating fear. And as I look at 2024, what concerns me is the epidemic of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation that has led to these dangerous threats against our election officials at every level is now intimidating people, and it's threatening recruitment, it's leading to early retirement, and this fear is pervasive and ongoing.
Thanks. I
I think like some of the panelists earlier today had mentioned, I'm still hopeful. And I have some concerns about about my staff and many of my colleagues across the state. So, I think that the biggest threat that we face locally is the mis and dis and malinformation around elections. I usually don't hear about it until it's out of control. You try to get ahead of some things, but it feels like there's 5 other sort of pieces of misinformation that you just don't learn about until it's sort of too late. I do worry sometimes about frankly, if I could be honest, my colleague Kathy Darling Allen, who is facing a sort of manual count of all ballots, and how voters are going to react to that. And I worry about the mental health of many of my peers across the state and across the country. A lot of folks that I talk to really don't want to be public about what they're experiencing, and are, I think, sort of quiet for far too long. And I do think that it's going to lead to people retiring before they intend to. And I mean, that's really concerning to me.
And your perspective is really interesting and important because, and this is true of me at least, for the last several years, I've been focused on the battleground states where the furor has seemed loudest and where we have cared the most about it because of the potential impact on the actual outcomes of competitive elections. But it's happening in non-battleground states too, like California. And I think it's really important to remember the breadth of this phenomenon across all 50 states. Secretary Benson, welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, as long as there's misinformation, there's going to be threats that stem from that misinformation. And what we saw in the tragedy in our Capitol on January 6th was that we were marking the beginning of a multi-year, multifaceted effort to undo democracy, to threaten democracy. And as these individuals who personify democracy through our work, we are then the subject of those threats. And we've all experienced that. What we've also experienced, however, in Michigan, we believe strongly, and I believe strongly in taking challenges and using them to make you better, stronger, more determined to do our work. And so we have seen both an increase in the misinformation and the threats, but we've also seen an increase in the strength and the determination of our election community to still ensure that democracy holds. And that's why I actually believe we can emerge from this moment in this last election of a 3-cycle trilogy, I believe, of election denialism with a stronger and healthier, more robust democracy than ever before. Populated by the voters and the people who work the elections, who I hope will also emerge stronger for the work that we've endured over the last few years.
Thank you. Okay, Bill, it's your turn, but I want to actually introduce a few ideas first, if I might. Everyone here, or many people here, have probably read the story that my colleague Yvonne Wingett-Sanchez published on Saturday about your experiences in Maricopa County, Arizona. It was an incredible story, and I think I probably speak for all here in thanking you for sharing that story and for the courage that it took to do so. I want to start first, before I ask you to comment, by reading a passage from the story. It's a quotation from your intake form when you sought mental health care for your trauma. And this is what you wrote. I'm an elected official who has experienced a significant amount of death threats since the 2020 election, and also have had many other elected officials from my own party who have attacked me and questioned my integrity. With COVID subsiding, I have started to attend public functions where I've seen some of these individuals, and I have reacted very negatively and gotten very angry. I've also been interviewed by many journalists over the last 16 months about this issue and have become very sad and very angry during these interviews, sometimes even crying. So I wonder if you could start by sharing some of the details of what happened to you that led you to that moment, and also what the impact was not only on you but your family, and the moment when you realized that you wanted and needed to do something about it for yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking me about this. And it's a little embarrassing for me to be sitting up here in front of this group telling this story, because I think this is the story of many people here and many people across the country. And for me, I think I was generally kind of known as a mild-mannered guy, conservative Republican, not a guy to rock the boat. And I experienced in the 2020 election, when we certified the election, saying that Joe Biden had won Maricopa County, and that became this, controversial statement to this day. And then we rolled into the Cyber Ninja audit in 2021, and my colleagues and I were one vote of the Senate away from literally being jailed. And I couldn't understand what was happening. And these people that I had worked with, other Republicans, for years on local issues, statewide issues, they turned their back on me and my colleagues. And I didn't deal with it well. And COVID was, with everything being on Zoom, I was sort of almost protected from the human reactions. But once things got better and I started going to these events, I'd be off in a corner and I would see someone come in who had let me down, in my opinion, who I felt had betrayed me. And I would just become incensed. And I'm over talking with my friends, right? People who've supported me for years. And I'm going on, and they're like backing away from me, What is your deal? And I did that a few times, and I came home to my wife, and I started explaining this, and she's like, you got to deal with this. I didn't like who I had become. I really didn't. And I didn't know how I'd gotten to this point. But in the spring of last year, our county attorney tragically passed away, and I was honored to eulogize her. And so at that funeral, I was face to face with a lot of these folks. And that's where I just snapped, and my wife was there. And these are people that I've respected for years. Again, my friends, and I'm sort of going off and looking at them and saying, where were you? Why haven't you stood behind us? We've gone through so much, like all of you in this room. I think as Republicans in particular, and I'm thrilled that there are Republicans here, like Brad and many others, who I think understand that feeling of betrayal. It's one thing, right, from the other side. Unfortunately, we are a bit tribal, right? Well, that's politics. But when it's your own side, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I made a fool of myself. I was embarrassed. And my wife was embarrassed of me. And I didn't know where to go. And we know, I think particularly as men, therapy, that's tough. That's tough, right? We sort of were brought up saying, just suck it up, right? That's what a lot of us were told. And I'm so grateful to my wife for, getting it through my head. And the way she got it through my head is, I felt pretty good about myself, right? I'm doing the right thing. I'm trying to do the right thing here, even though it will have negative impact on my political career. But I didn't realize that I was not paying attention to her and my kids, my family, what really matters. And so that's what it took for me to really wake me up.
What has been the reaction to the piece that you've heard from folks you know?
So this was the thing, when I was trying to decide whether to do it, I really had to look inside of myself and decide why I wanted to do it. And I decided it was because of the people in this room and the others that you represent, right? Maybe if someone read my story and it kind of clicked for them, if it maybe caused them to think about things, to pray about it, whatever might be the way to address it, that's why I decided to go ahead and do it. The reaction has been pretty remarkable. Not only have I had people reach out to me from the election community, and that's wonderful for them to open up to me, but I'm hearing from people in other places in politics, or literally just people, lawyers, doctors, Vietnam veterans, who are reaching out and talking to me about the trauma that they've been dealing with or maybe not dealing with. And I can't tell you what a gift that is to have these folks share this with me. And I'll admit it, I'm embarrassed to call what I'm experiencing PTSD. I mean, to me, that label, that's for someone who's been in war, someone who has bullets whizzing by their head. But, that's what I've been told is it's, dealing with the trauma. And so I now know what I need to do. And this is the thing is that I want everyone to know here. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. This is something that I've dealt with through the past couple of years, but I think that going through therapy gave me the wide stance that I needed to stand alongside my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors and the County Recorder, and to do our very best working with our whole team in August and November of 22, when we had an election that a few people paid attention to in Arizona, I think.
One last question on this, and that is, can you just talk a little bit about how do you stay in that wide stance when some of the forces at work that created the trauma aren't gone? You told me and some of us on a call on Friday a story that indicated just how things haven't changed in Maricopa. Maybe you could share that story and then talk about how you recommend to your colleagues here how to continue staying healthy and strong as these forces continue to work out there in your state and your county.
Was it? And I apologize.
It was the Lincoln Day dinner.
Oh yes. So again, look, I know that there continue to be questions out there about elections, and I feel like it's my job, my colleagues' job, to continue to educate folks. And we really leaned forward on that in Maricopa County to try and pre-bunk and then post-bunk the various conspiracies that are here. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Ray Valenzuela, one of my partners in Maricopa County, who is our director of early voting and works with the recorder. And so, we're doing our very best, but unfortunately in Arizona, we do have, the fever has not broken. And in the Republican Party, which I've been a part of the Arizona Republican Party since the day I registered to vote, we have certain folks that simply are not acknowledging the facts of what are going on. So I sat with someone last week who was at our Lincoln Day luncheon. For those of you who are familiar with Republican politics, that's something we do, an opportunity to get together, break bread with other Republicans. And so the Maricopa County Republican chair was actually acknowledging the elected officials in the room. And one of the people that was recognized was the, quote, Secretary of State in waiting, Mark Fincham, and was invited up to the stage. So again, we unfortunately have people who are unwilling to acknowledge the facts of what's going on and the truth. And that's why we need to continue to lean forward. And I understand people who want to, not be out there in the public eye on this. But when we do that, then it creates a vacuum that others fill with misinformation and disinformation. So we're going to continue to push forward, but and I know I'm preaching the choir here in this group, everyone is moving in that same direction, but we need those who have decided to be a little quieter to raise their voices. And if we do that, then we will be successful in making sure that the truth is out there.
Thank you so much. Very compelling. Secretary Benson, you'll notice this is going to be the second time that I name check a Washington Post story. I got to take my shots where I can. We had a story a couple of weeks ago that colleagues of mine, Greg Jaffe and Patrick Marley, wrote about Ottawa County, Michigan, and where there has been a wholesale takeover of the county board, and they're doing a lot of stuff, and they want the way elections are administered to change, and it's based on misinformation. And I wondered if you could address how prevalent that story is in Michigan, because I don't believe that's the only place where that's happening, and also what some of the consequences are of having inexperienced people with authority over elections, and what kinds of things they're trying to do, and what you're trying to do about it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because, well, what's happening in Ottawa County is there is one of the really best election administrators, local election administrators in the country. Justin Roebuck is the county clerk in Ottawa County. And he is up for re-election this year, and there's been various other ways in which local individuals boosted through misinformation have gained power and really tried to disrupt his work, which is really, it's the gold standard in many ways of local election officials. It's transparent. He's leaned into the misinformation. He goes everywhere, talks to people. We've seen so many folks in Arizona do this as well, and other places. And so it's real. I'm glad there's that spotlight on Ottawa County. But there's other stories as well, like in Hillsdale County in Adams Township, where last Tuesday, a local clerk who on the other side had actually tried to, among other things, take various actions that were fueled by misinformation. I'll just say that because we had to exercise supervisory authority, a number of other things. That local clerk who was posting QAnon conspiracy theories and a number of other things was recalled and lost in a very, very, very conservative community in Michigan, lost her seat to a Democrat/independent affiliated local leader who is now going to be the new local clerk in Adams Township. So what we've also seen is that voters have become increasingly, so that's one story. Voters have become increasingly aware and smart about rejecting election deniers. But on the other hand, my opponent, who lost by 14 points her race for Secretary of State in Michigan, who also hasn't conceded, and because she hasn't conceded, she was awarded the chairmanship or chairwomanship of the Michigan Republican Party and now leads the party, which, among other things, appoints half of the certifiers in the state for the election in 2024. So what I see all of this is an ongoing battle, as I mentioned earlier, with many battlefronts, with emerging vulnerabilities that are really oftentimes personified by election officials who are either standing up to do the right thing and dealing with much headwinds as a response or threats, and others who are choosing to succumb to conspiracy theories and in some ways losing their positions as a result of it. I think at the end of the day, not only is transparency and truth our friend and on our side in combating all of this, but voter engagement. And that's why, in my view, the most dangerous thing, we can talk about a lot of specific things we're doing in Michigan, a Truth Tellers Task Force, where we're equipping faith leaders to be at the polls, to spread truthful information, and a number of other things. But at the end of the day, it's the people and the voters everywhere who aren't typically focused on politics, who will, if they continue to see, as we all have, the battle of democracy as really one of the most critical issues of this moment, and they continue to prioritize finding information, pushing back on election deniers and rejecting the misinformation, then we have a chance to succeed. So that's really the story of what we're trying to do in Michigan, recognize the different waves, and we've been dealing with this in different counties in different ways for over 2 years now. It's not going to end anytime soon. We hope it'll subside after 24, but it might not. We have to be prepared for that. But we can't lose sight of the fact that the way out of this are voters who are Republican, Democratic, Independent, who are, and the professional election administrators who do their jobs every day, working together to just continue with the truth on our side, with the law on our side, with the Constitution on our side, and the vast majority of the American people on our side, demand that democracy survive. And that's what I think you're going to see, in my view, is the next chapter of the Ottawa story. And that's what we've seen in other counties that have, like Ottawa, dealt with these types of things.
Secretary Bellows, maybe now is the time to go in a little more detail about Town X in Maine. And I think the themes that you had mentioned about that story are the inexperience of newcomers to election administration. And is that the town where they're contemplating a hand count too?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so Maine administers elections at the municipal level, not the county level like New England. And so we have more than 500 towns, many of them, most of them, very small. This is a small rock red town. It's been Republican as long as I've been alive. And the clerk that was threatened after the 2020 elections, physically threatened by someone who was really, I think, fell victim to disinformation and lies and election denialism, that clerk left before 2022. And when I talked to the new incoming clerk, this individual and indeed other individuals in the town were still very active. That clerk is now left. We have a new clerk. We've seen an exodus of other town officials in that town. And suddenly, Maine has the old-fashioned New England town meeting style of local government. And I just found out that at this June town meeting, there is a warrant article to require hand count in this town to eliminate the ES&S election tabulators, something the town doesn't actually have the authority to do, but that doesn't seem to matter. And so you have now this toxic mixture of people with experience leaving their positions, and then some of these ideas grabbing hold. And that makes me worry about the future in 2024. And across our state, we are seeing some difficulty when longtime clerks are retiring in recruiting people to take those local election officials' positions. And seriously, it's very low pay oftentimes, and you're potentially subjecting yourself to harassment or threats. And I wish that weren't true, but it is. And I think that's ongoing.
What is your office doing in that town to address what they're trying to do there and to address their inexperience?
Because Maine is like one large small town, we can do clerk education, we can do clerk training. For the first time before the 2022 election, we did de-escalation training. We brought in the FBI and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, CISA, to do de-escalation training for our clerks. We did a pilot with clerks who wanted to do security analyses for their polling places with CISA. So we're trying to provide those tools, that training, for our local election officials. We had one town in 2022 where local election officials walked off the job about 3 weeks prior to the election. So I was able to call a retired clerk and say, can you go in and run that town's elections? That town has still not been able to find a permanent replacement. So we can do a lot, but there's still this larger structural problem that's emerging because of the epidemic of disinformation.
And you told another story that I'd love for you to tell here today about one way your office of how many people? 3, 4?
No, we're a little bit bigger than that, but
Sorry.
not much.
I was exaggerating. It's smaller than, say, Arizona or Georgia. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
One of the ways that your office combats the misinformation is by testifying with every single bill that comes through the legislature. And this is an amazing, not so fun fact. Tell the story of what happens to every single bill that's introduced in Maine.
Maine is special. Every state should model themselves after Maine, but every bill gets a legislative hearing, and every bill gets a committee vote, and every bill gets a vote on the floor of the House and Senate. Now this means
Cannot imagine.
this means great things can happen, like we were able to pass protections for our election workers in 2021. So it is now a Class D crime to threaten an election worker. And we also were able to secure resources for training and for post-election audits. But it also means we have to combat a lot of disinformation. And we have seen those bills pop up, bills that would restrict our ability to accept federal funds from Congress, which we desperately need. Another bill that would require 24-hour camera surveillance of all of our absentee drop boxes to be maintained for over a year and available to anyone who wants to examine that surveillance and then harass the people using those drop boxes. So we're trying to knock down that disinformation in the legislature every single day. And you're right, we actually do have 3 people that testify before the legislature on elections. So well done.
It was a stab in the dark. One of the areas that I know every election administrator in America has had discussions about, at the very least, if not taken action on, is ramping up security measures, actual physical security measures. And I wonder if each of you could talk about what you're doing or seeing in your state, what you need that you aren't doing or wish you would do, and also I think a really important sort of related topic is funding for elections. And so why don't I start at the end with Secretary Benson?
Yeah, funding is it. I mean, we were able to have $8 million of federal funding distributed to clerks throughout the state in 2022, all of which was taken and we have 1,500 local clerks in our state who administer the elections on the ground level. And we basically said, submit for this money, and people used it for security guards, for bulletproof glass, for other types of recruitment of additional individuals, and then on top of that, on top of the funding, we also worked extensively with Michigan State Police and local law enforcement to ensure a direct line was made and the relationship was built at the local level so that everyone knew who to call and what to do in response to any potential thing. And we're actually building that out even more robustly for 24. But the funding is critical. And I'm in the middle of I wouldn't call it a fight, but it's certainly really hard to, even when you have a quote unquote trifecta in Michigan, to convince local state lawmakers that they need to fund early voting, which is mandated by our state constitution. So we haven't even gotten to asking for security funding, which is why the federal government, because all of us everywhere are dealing with these security threats across the state, across the country, and the misinformation that comes from it and fuels it, we desperately need federal funding across the board for this, and it seems to be the least that Congress can do.
Is bulletproof glass just a new normal for election offices around the country?
I mean, we anticipate all potential things that could occur. We're also trying to get a bill passed to ban firearms within 100 feet of the polling place, which we hope will pass so we can join states like Georgia and Texas with those protections. Truly, Georgia, thank you for having that protection. I mean, we have to take seriously the moment that we're in and prepare for it. And that's, I mean, I'm not comfortable necessarily using the battle analogies, but that's what it feels like in this moment and what it's felt like for Michigan since April of 2020 when armed individuals showed up at our state house to try to disrupt the process.
Right.
So we have been, and I come from a military family, so we come and respond to things as though everything is a battle and we are in a battle over the future of our democracy, which in many ways we really are. And the weaponry that we see oftentimes in battle, we have to be prepared to potentially be used by those who oppose the basic tenets of our American system of democracy.
Bill, has your county ramped up physical security for election administration, and have you been able to fund it adequately?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate that we have an incredible team. So we have Maricopa County Sheriff, and then we work with the FBI, we work with other local law enforcement. This all started for us in November of 2020. When we all recall, the eyes of the country were on Maricopa County, and we had a lot of people in the alt-right and others who decided to hang out outside of our tabulation center while our folks were still counting the votes. And so that's when we really worked very quickly with our sheriff to build that infrastructure up. Then with 2022, we had significant work, like I said, partnership. And I was there in the tabulation center along with Ray and all the other workers, and we felt very safe, and it was because of the very intentional efforts of the sheriff's office and others. We saw this coming. As I think most of you know, in Arizona, we do early voting, so that starts 27 days in advance of Election Day. And so we have, because state law allows it, we have folks in there, they're doing their work, they're actually tabulating the votes, and we had people posted outside of our tabulation center. So our elections workers are working 12, 14-hour days. They're walking outside, and folks are coming up to them. They're videotaping them. They're taking pictures of their license plate. We heard about that, and Recorder Richard and I stood up and said, this is not going to be allowed to continue. We're not going to allow the harassment of the election workers to continue. Some people don't like to hear that because some people want to intimidate all of us. They want to intimidate our elections workers. And so we have to continue to speak the truth, but we do need to provide physical security. And again, I just can't say enough about local and federal law enforcement and the partnership, and the funding has been there to support it. And certainly my colleagues and I on the board and Recorder Richard are committed to funding these physical security efforts.
Thank you.
We've been able to do a few things, but like my colleague Kathy had sort of alluded to earlier, some of these streams of funding have to be approved by the County Board of Supervisors, and there's only a few things statutorily that I'm able to just sort of do without going through layers and layers of bureaucracy. So a couple of things is hiring private security to sort of monitor the process of getting ballots returned to headquarters. I wish we could, have a little bit more, oomph to that, but we're able to afford, our headquarters at the very least. We've also sort of switched our recruitment process slightly for our vote center managers, and have been able to actually recruit them as county employees, so they have to go through the background check and sort of have to be vetted a little bit more than, say, a stipend poll worker would
Is
be.
that a result of of a situation that you encountered, or just sort of proactive?
Well, I think that, I had become, a little bit concerned about some of the folks who were sort of targeting me specifically, but just sort of more generally sort of behaving in ways that I don't think are conducive to a nonpartisan poll worker. So at the very least, I wanted the managers to be able to go through the background check and sort of go through that county process. They sort of like it because they get paid a little bit more than a stipend
Smart.
worker, and I have the ability to sort of know that we're dealing with someone who is sort of an honest broker. Not that we doubted before, but it's good to have that sort of confirmation. In 2020, because of the pandemic, we did install cameras around the sort of tabulation areas, so we could have the ability to sort of play back things and keep an eye on some of the spicier people who would come into our office to observe. For the other things that we had been talking about, things like ballistic glass and stuff, those are the maybe nice to haves, but we don't have the funding streams to be able to support that. And I think a lot of sort of talking with the county about what's reasonable. I certainly don't want to turn the elections office into Fort Knox,
Right.
and make it unwelcoming, but at the same time, I do want my staff and all of the poll workers to feel like they are safe. Apart from my duty to run the election, I do have a duty to make sure that our employees are in a safe work environment.
Totally.
And if they don't feel safe, then I need to address it, but we need to do it responsibly.
It also occurs to me that there's another mandate, which is for there to be transparency. And actually, before you go, Shenna, I wanted to ask Jocelyn to follow up on security in Michigan, because remember in 2020, the circus of Wayne County, and as you've thought about heading into 2024, have you had discussions about how to, you sort of, I feel like you probably have to do two things there. One is make sure it's secure, but also not eliminate transparency, because there was so much misinformation that came out of those protests and the night, the counting and all of that stuff. And have you thought about how to address security while also sort of thinking proactively about how to nip misinformation in the bud by having enough transparency?
Yeah, I mean, if people bang on windows, then it cracks the glass. You have to put boards up to keep the glass from breaking and falling in and hurting
Right.
people, right? And so that's real. That's the security piece, and then it becomes the fuel for misinformation. I think we're all a lot more seasoned now, having lived through that, where, at the same time, while all that was going on, you had hundreds of challengers from both political parties inside, we're talking about Detroit, observing the process. We anticipate that will continue to be an issue, and we have, again, grown in terms of our protections and also regulations of challengers. I think the bottom line is we need to be very clear, and what we found to be most effective, frankly, is just to be very clear at the outset, proactively, the boundaries of the law and the guardrails that we will enforce, and also, the importance of having the transparency piece so that we invite people. We recruit poll workers from both parties. We ensure that there are poll workers and observers from both parties there to allow for that transparency both pre, during, and after the election process. But at the same time, if at any point anyone becomes disruptive, be they a poll worker, be they a clerk, be they a challenger, be they someone outside the process, we will enforce the law and they will be removed. And being very clear about not just that, but how ineffective it will be or would be in the furtherance of misinformation to cause a disruption and break the law, by making the case that not only will you have broken the law, but you will have not succeeded in doing whatever it is you want to do, disrupt democracy or anything. That actually helped us in 2022 deter a lot of the same types of disturbances, and working with law enforcement to communicate that ahead of time, because it becomes then much less vitriolic on the spot when people know there are going to be consequences if they run afoul of the regulations of the law, the protections that we have for our workers, our poll workers, our voters, and others.
Thank you. Secretary Bellows?
Secretary Benson just said something really important that I think earlier in the day we were talking about how do we increase trust, not just in your own municipality or your own state, but across the country. And I think what she referenced in terms of poll workers from each party, observers from each party, is something that happens nationally. And I think really leveraging people from both parties and independents as well, leveraging our civil service employees and leveraging partnerships. So in Maine, we have scarce resources. We cannot afford bulletproof glass in most situations. But we partnered with the Maine State Police for our recounts and our ranked choice voting tabulation, which is a unique Maine feature of our elections, to host the statewide recounts and ranked choice voting tabulation at the administrative headquarters of the Maine State Police in a very secure facility.
Oh, wow.
And then from transparency's perspective, we live streamed the whole thing from start to finish, every single minute that we were in that room counting those ballots. Now, it happened over several days. That was on Facebook, and I was narrating it. It was very boring.
Sounds gripping.
Not winning any Pulitzers like the Washington Post.
But on your way, on your way.
But anyway, I think, so those partnerships with law enforcement, the Brennan Center helped us do some training for our police chiefs and our sheriffs, leveraging partnerships with CISA for statewide cybersecurity summit. We haven't even touched on cybersecurity and the threats coming in online.
Sure.
So I think it's all of those things.
You mentioned the conviction for harassment. Did that prompt any steps taken by your office or in local offices in Maine?
So we are doing annual training now for our clerks in de-escalation techniques and threat reporting for our clerks to centralize those threats, and really making sure there are strong partnerships with law enforcement at every level so that they are trained to respond immediately when they get that call. So in 2022, we just had one in the state that we know of, a threat against an election worker, but that person immediately received a visit by law enforcement. And that one didn't move to prosecution because the person who had been very angry, very threatening, was so chastened by the immediate law enforcement presence that he was apologetic. He realized that he'd lost it and needed to adjust and make amends. So, I mean, that's a happy ending that doesn't always happen. There's another person in Maine who served jail time, and that's another consequence as well. But we need to make sure that there's an immediacy of response.
And can I just add to that really quick? Because, I mean, my experience, unfortunately, with our election workers is quite different. Unfortunately, because I would like to be able to be responsive, and I'm sure that law enforcement would like to be responsive, when the thing is happening in real time. And I have heard, about incidents with some of my workers that were deeply concerning, where I would have called the cops, but they didn't tell me until months later.
Wow.
Because they just did not know how to react. They couldn't believe what they were experiencing. One of the incidents that comes to mind for me is at around the time when one of our busiest vote centers had closed for the evening. a voter had come up maybe 5 minutes after the polls closed, and the election workers said, "We're really sorry, the polls are closed," and the voter got angry. The vote center workers felt trapped in the vote center. They had closed the doors to sort of avoid confrontation with this voter, and they described to me a sort of very long incident where there was pounding and shouting at that door. And I was thinking, why am I hearing about this months after the fact? Why did you not feel comfortable calling our office?
Right.
So, I think that there's got to be, some sort of
Training.
more training, and we do provide the training. I have been sort of, it's been hard for me because I have done the training of our vote center workers in the past to say, please report, please report, please report. And then I see the look on their faces where they're sort of actively thinking, should I do this? So it's, I got to strike a balance between, report if there's an incident, but you probably won't have an incident because most people are really good. They don't want to be confrontational. I'm still trying to figure out, how to sort of be more of a resource to our workers.
Thank you. I had been looking forward to asking Gabe Sterling a question about Georgia, but I'm going to ask his stand-in, Secretary Raffensperger, this question instead. I'm not ambushing him. I asked his permission ahead of time if I could ask him this question. There was a retreat there was a Republican donor retreat in Nashville a few weeks ago, and there were two interesting things that happened at that retreat, in my opinion. Even though the most of the headlines out of the retreat were that Trump was still asserting his dominance over the party and was still talking about having the 2020 election stolen from him. But two things happened. One was that Governor Brian Kemp, who attended the retreat, told donors, not a single swing voter in a single swing state will vote for our nominee if they choose to talk about the 2020 election being stolen. And then the other thing that happened was that in a closed-door session with Cleta Mitchell, the prominent Republican lawyer and election denier, a wealthy North Georgia donor, who I believe, Secretary Raffensperger, stood up and said, the 2020 election was not stolen and we need to stop talking about it. And there was a little bit of booing that you could hear on the audio, but I thought that both of those facts, the fact that Governor Kemp felt comfortable standing up and saying that, knowing that it would get reported in the media, and that this donor from conservative North Georgia would also get up and say something that Mr. Bagwell got up to say, was quite remarkable, and perhaps a moment to feel optimistic about what might come next. And Secretary Raffensperger, I thought that was a good question to ask you, since Gabe's not here today.
Was there a question in there? I thought my governor was quite clear on that one. I think it's.
Should we feel optimism? We've been talking about all the ways in which the story has not gone away, but.
And I think what we've shown in Georgia, if you're an election denier, be it Stacey Abrams or anyone else, you're not going to win in Georgia. And that's the point the governor is making. And we've moved forward, and anyone that is going to be hard stop to steal in 2024, they're not going to have success in Georgia. And so when I said that we're going to have our primary on March 12th, 2024, I said that, really victory runs through Georgia for someone that has, a vision for our country and a vision to move the state forward. Looking past is not going to be successful, and being stopped to steal is not going to be successful. And I think we've proved it with our 2022 results.
Thanks. I don't have any more questions, but I think if anybody in the audience does, we can open it up. Are we doing microphones?
Yeah, microphone's coming this way.
Okay, stand by.
Hi, do I need to stand? Okay, I'm hearing this. Yes, okay. Hi, my name is Talia Smurray, and I work for Declaration for American Democracy. But I want to start off, I'm also training to be a psychiatrist, and I just want to thank every single one of you who named the mental health issues that we have in our work and we have in our field, and especially you for being so public about it when we know so many, not only males, but in the Republican Party are so oppositional to that work. So, but we're talking about threats and harassment, and for me, who works on advocating and moving state and federal policy, I'm just really curious, what are you all seeing as the gold standard and what you would like to see from either the federal government or your states around protecting our election workers? You know, I know in my state of Michigan, we've had some bills introduced where we talk about prosecution, but there's pushback around when there's vagaries in the law, how that can be weaponized, where, you know, if someone's in the line complaining, saying like, oh, I'm still in line, my child is crying, I'm hungry, someone can say, oh, you're harassing me, oh, you're threatening me. And now we have a genuine tired person facing the court of law for something that's not actually a harassment, but when it's so vague, we open ourselves up for that. So I guess for me, my question for the four of you is, what would be the gold standard if you got to choose what some legislation at either the federal or state level to protect our election workers? You know, hopefully, you know, we don't have to keep having bulletproof glass at my grandmother's polling place in Detroit.
So I'm happy to give you the Republican view on this.
Always.
All right?
Yes.
At least this Republican's view, which is we don't always look to the government for answers. And this is a big issue, is we need, starting within my party, we need more leaders within the Republican Party to stand up. When these threats are out there online, speak out against it. Say that it's wrong. I mean, the silence has been deafening, not from all, but many Republicans. Same thing, community leaders, business leaders, they've been, for the most part, silent. Again, my experience is the Arizona experience. And I think that's one of the things that has led to so much cyberbullying. The Cyber Ninja audit and all this has been a vacuum within my party. So while I am thrilled to see the prosecutions that have been taking place, both at the federal and state level, I think that's important. People need to understand this isn't a game. This isn't like crank anchors here where you're calling people up. This is serious when you make these threats either digitally or on the phone. So I'm pleased to see that. But I think there's a lot of personal responsibility that people need to take on, because those business leaders who benefit from, say, a pro-business environment in the state of Arizona, well, that's done because there are certain leaders who are elected who have that perspective. If they are driven away by the harassment and the threats, you know, so that's what I think we need to do. More personal responsibility, but certainly I'm open to legislation that might provide additional protections to election workers as well.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. There, needs to be some personal responsibility for the things that you say, because words matter. And, at the same time, I think that, there could be more accountability in the law for folks who are, sort of doing some pretty bad stuff to election workers, particularly to poll workers. They really don't deserve that. I think that, some attitudes need to shift. I have been told by more than one lawmaker that, oh, you've been threatened, you've been harassed, you must be doing something right. And I'm like, no, I don't think that that's the right approach to it. I also think that there are folks in my county who think that it can't happen here. And I don't live in that world where I just sort of optimistically don't plan for stuff. And I also think that there should be sort of more incentives to sort of do what Bill is describing, and really stand up and say, hey, you can disagree, you can ask all the questions you want, but what you're saying, what you're doing to these people, it's not right. They need to be called out.
So I think we can't separate the fact that misinformation has fueled a lot of the threats. And we know we've kept saying that. And so what we've actually pushed for in Michigan is a deceptive practices law to ban the intentional dissemination of false information, knowing that it yields to intentional use and weaponization of that misinformation to threaten people, whether they be voters or election workers.
What's the status of that law?
I believe there was a hearing already, so it's working its way through the committee process. And we've got a number of other different things that we're working on in Michigan, including a Voting Rights Act for the state. And so that said, just like there's consequences for intentionally lying about a product in consumer protection law, there should be consequences for intentionally lying about elections. And so that is one thing that I think we really have to take on, to seek consequences in those, because too often times we're seeing the threats dismissed, even by lawmakers who say, whatever, we all deal with threats. When Secretary Toulouse-Oliver and I sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee and talked about these threats, along with Matt Crane from Colorado and a number of others, I think it was Senator Cruz who tried to do, or there was a whole effort of equivalency to all the different threats that many people in law enforcement and other places. Yes, I mean, that is real, and we also have to seek accountability across the board. However, the fact that misinformation is at the root of the threats of our democracy, and that it's rooted in an effort not just to intimidate us as public servants, but intimidate the voters that we fight for from participating in our democracy, all rooted in just lies and falsehoods. That is what I think we need to seek accountability for. And so to me, the gold standard is recognizing that the intentional disruption of democracy, whatever form it takes, we need to have accountability for that if we're going to emerge out of this moment where we have a democracy where voters on both sides of the aisle and apolitical, independent, everywhere feel they can have rightly placed confidence in our elections process because they are being equipped with truthful information about that process as opposed to lies.
While also staying on the right side of First Amendment protections, which also complicates that whole debate.
But
right?
that's where intent comes in. So just like the consumer protection laws are very, and protections against lying about products have very well-established protections within the First Amendment. The government has an interest in the intentional, seeking consequences for the intentional dissemination of information that would violate others' fundamental right to vote.
And this goes to partnerships. With the law that I described in protecting election workers in Maine, we reached out to the ACLU to work with them to craft our bill so that something they could support and something that would protect voters as well as our election workers. Ultimately, I know there are folks here from the Hill. We need resources as well. The human resources are stretched to capacity right now in elections, and when I think about what keeps me up at night for 2024, it is making sure that we are protecting our human resources and supporting our human resources. And part of that is financial investment in infrastructure, and so that election workers can stop working overtime to make buckets out of duct tape, as one panelist mentioned earlier.
Hi, is this on? Oh, okay. Doki Fassine with Issue 1. For organizations that are trying to find new avenues and new initiatives to support election administrators, I'm curious what the panelists think about how we can provide more voice to you to speak to the American public about what is happening to you. I mean, you know, there are more and more articles coming out, but it feels like the vast majority of the American public, your voters, don't really know what's happening to their election administrators, the way that it's happening. And I feel like without that, without them having that outrage that, you know, election officials in this country are going through, what you're actually going through, is there going to be enough pressure on lawmakers to really act in time? Natalie, you said something earlier about we don't really, you know, there's a sort of, I don't know if it's a shame, but you basically said people don't want to speak up about what they're dealing with. And election administrators feel like they have to quietly bear this burden because somehow it's embarrassing, or they don't want to maybe even give in to their opponents who are, the people who are causing this, and sort of make them feel like they're winning, right? Giving more sort of fuel to what they're doing. So can you elaborate on that? Is there anything we can do to support you in speaking up more about what's happening?
Well, I think for some of my colleagues, and sometimes for me, I don't want to draw more attention to myself. I definitely don't want to draw more attention to the fact that sometimes, what people say is really hurtful. I do want to sometimes put on a strong face for my staff because they are, pretty bothered by, all of the things that sort of people say. I don't want them to think that it's all, sort of going down the drain, right? I do want to, sort of make sure that, I'm strong for them. And, when I do choose to speak out, it is a hard decision every single time. It is hard to have that kind of spotlight on you, and the reason why I admire the Washington Post article so much is that it is hard to stand up in front of people and say I need help, and I can't do it by myself. It is really rough. So I think the best thing that folks like, and organizations like Issue One can do is to, sort of have our backs, sort of bring a spotlight, bring legislation, be an advocate for more funding so, we can do our jobs and don't have to worry about that part. So exactly what you're doing, just, more.
And maybe if I can just add on that point, is about sort of seeking help. I mean, between Game 4 and Game 5 for the Suns, okay, had to work that in. Devin Booker's and Kevin Durant have to get ready for the next game, right? They go, they ice their legs, right? They go, they stretch, they do things like that. We work with our minds, right? This is what we use. We use our brains. And to think that we are robots that don't need to, get work on ourselves, work on these challenges. We are not building widgets as elections officials. We have one of the hardest jobs in our country right now. We, along with the courts, are the guardrails, people have said. Mm-hmm. So for us to say, now, the choice to become public, that's another issue, and that's up to everyone. But I would encourage people to say, it's not a sign of weakness to say, I need to go get ready for that next election, right? And I need to go, hit a golf ball, or, go pray. I need to go to church. I need to go to therapy. Whatever it is, we have to take care of ourselves. You talk about supporting human resources. And one other thing I'll say on that, we go into politics, we kind of expect the slings and arrows. But our elections workers, who in the interest of transparency, which I completely support, are on 24/7 live stream in Maricopa County. People watch this all day long. They see something happen that they don't understand, claim that is an example of fraud, and then they post that person who, again, never ran for office. They are serving an important role, but they never chose to be in the public eye like that. And then they become the source of threats. They're a victim to this. That is wrong. And those are the sorts of things that appreciate your support, all of your support. But you know what, in particular, let's support them. And I know everyone here is committed to that because they're good people who have given their lives to this. And if we don't support them, guess what? That next generation, they are going to choose something else. But fortunately, I've seen a lot of people in that next generation come up to me and say, I'm inspired by what's going on in elections administration, and I choose that career. So there's a lot of optimism out there too, and I'm very encouraged to see that.
Hi, thank you all so much for, it's been a very illuminating panel. My name's Dan Wellick, I'm a professor at Rice University, and I want to ask you about something that you've hinted at, which is cybersecurity. That could be XY 6-digit number at Twitter generating a lot of noise, or that could be other coordinated nation-state interference in our elections in various ways. We hear about it in the news occasionally. I wonder if you could illuminate how you've dealt with cyber threats and cybersecurity issues in your administration.
So we've partnered with CISA in multiple ways. They've been hosting Tabletop the Vote exercises for election officials across the nation annually. That's been a very useful tool for us and our clerks. Additionally, hosting a statewide cybersecurity summit to work with clerks on some of the cybersecurity basics. I think it's really important. It's also an element of disinformation, right? One of the chief myths is that somehow the tabulators are connected to the internet. And I like to say, no, it's a modern day abacus. They are hardened machines, they're not connected to the internet. But that's a hard conspiracy theory to fight back against. So one of the challenges, of course, as we talk about cybersecurity, is to bat down those conspiracy theories that are epidemic and, in fact, being sown in some cases by foreign actors who are seeking to disrupt our democracy and, unfortunately, undermine voter confidence and voter participation, as Secretary Benson mentioned earlier.
By the way, isn't it interesting how many people we're learning have said that they don't actually believe that Dominion machines flipped votes? People like Fox News executives and hosts of Fox News programs, and also Cleta Mitchell said that at that Republican donor retreat. It's kind of interesting that there's a new line in the sand where some people are willing to say out loud, no, that was a bridge too far for me. Although I don't think that the rank and file conservative Trump supporting public has followed yet about the Dominion machines.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like accountability matters.
I think just for me at the county level, having the relationship with the county IT department is really important. We have to do quarterly trainings on cybersecurity, not just for the permanent staff, but also the temporary staff that are onboarded. Of course, we also don't have any machines that are connected to the internet. We sort of do the tabletop exercises, not only with the state, but we're sort of looking at sort of county level tabletops to sort of stress test our contingency plans. I think all of those things are super important, and of course it helped a couple years back. We did get some reimbursements from the state to sort of put some cybersecurity protections in place. That was really useful.
Yeah, and same thing for us in Maricopa County, fourth largest county in the country, so we have a very robust cybersecurity program, not only in elections, but throughout the county. And same thing, and we have talked about this a lot in Maricopa County, that it is an air-gapped system. There is no way that folks can interact remotely with our tabulation machines. And in fact, we had President Trump come into town and sort of demand that several state senators get the routers. That you may have seen that speech. And the problem was that those routers we have other important operations like the courts and the sheriff's office that are connected to that. But we wanted to come up with a solution in the interest of transparency. So we actually, the board entered an agreement with Senator Karen Fann back then, who was the president of the Senate, to have IT experts examine those routers, and they confirmed as well, 3 different IT experts, our tabulation machines are not connected to the internet. So again, we will continue to get the word out there, but nonetheless, there are other parts of the operation that it is very important, because when you get in the news, you are attacked by both foreign and domestic actors, and we're very much focused on that. We really have an incredible cybersecurity team at Maricopa County.
You got me all the way in the end. How's it going? Thank you. Ben Wessel, I work at Emerson Collective. I want to talk about the human resources piece and all the retirements we're hearing about, or people not wanting to take these jobs. Everyone's saying it's held together with duct tape, but it's holding. The duct tape's working. Y'all are Swiss Army knives and crushing it. And so I'm sort of curious, how will we know when it's broken? You've been able to be resourceful so far, so good, and elections haven't completely fallen apart, and I'm very grateful, but I try and raise money to make sure y'all can keep doing the work, and everyone's like, well, it hasn't broken yet, so do we really have to worry about this? So how will we know when it's broken, and how would you answer those folks? Thanks.
I think the images of our United States Capitol on January 6th indicates something's broken. And I can say, having observed the escalation of election costs that, among other things, misinformation has yielded, whether it be security or other things, to the stress of whether it's people leaving the profession or people just simply not being able to do basic functions of our statewide Bureau of Elections, of making sure things are posted on time or things are responded to on time. If you just look at the data, there's no question that the stressors are increasing. Our job is to deliver anyway, and that's what we do, but it shouldn't have to be that way. And so don't allow the fact that we're really good at hiding how hard this is. I see everyone nodding. Mitigate your desire to help us do this with a little less stress. And then again, in all things, math and data can illustrate exactly what we all need to do our jobs without the duct tape and the Swiss Army knives. And that is actually what helped us in Michigan in 2020 avoid, despite the fact that we had our highest turnout election, more people voting absentee than ever before, 2/3 of the electorate voting by mail and all of that. There are a lot of ways in which things could have actually broken on that side. And what broke was the misinformation and sort of the post-election piece. But that said, how much worse could it have been had we not finished counting all of our ballots within 24 hours of the polls closing? Had we had disruptions at the polling place? Had we had poll workers not show up and not have a reserve of 150 people ready to go to fill their slots so that every polling place opened on time? Like, we were ready, but at the same time, more partners and funding would help us ensure we had enough machines and all the, so the need is there. Math and data can illustrate the need, along with just listening to the sort of litany. We have we estimate we need $170 million in Michigan to be prepared for 2024 that we don't necessarily have accounted for, because we also now have to prepare for 9 days of early voting, prepaid postage on all election-related mailings, a permanent absentee voting list, ballot tracking, a number of other things that are just being added that we have to be able to pay for. So I think that the short way of answering that is just ask us to give you a litany of everything that we need, and we'll tell you in itemization with cost, and we'll also be able to tell you exactly what you can expect to happen as a result of having 4 machines instead of 2, as a result of having 5 election workers registering people on Michigan State's campus on election night as opposed to 2, which is what we could afford, right? So anyway, sorry if I sound I'm triggered, but we need funds, and don't allow the fact that we've made it this far without, while still being afloat, to indicate that we, can keep doing this.
I would also add that instances where the local certifying body has refused to certify an election result without actual evidence that comports with whatever the law in that state requires for an election to not be certified is an example of the system breaking. Mm-hmm. Secretary Benson was instrumental, along with AG Nessel in 2020, in not allowing that to happen at the state level with the Board of Canvassers, or was it Wayne County? Sorry. But it's happened in other states, and it's required legal challenge and intervention. And I think that's an area, I know it's an area that I am looking at as a journalist, where that's an area of breakdown that I would be interested in covering, and also, of course, be alarmed by.
So I agree with all that, but I'll give you a very literal answer to it, is we do know when it's broken. And the reason we know it is because we have audits. Not Cyber Ninja audits, but audits done by professionals. And the audits tell you if it's broken, and the audits are showing that it's not. Despite, again, and from a customer service perspective, we had issues in Maricopa County in 2022, but the audit showed that the votes were counted accurately, and that's what we're seeing nationally. So to take a very literal answer to it, it's not broken. In the end, we get through all this, all the human emotions, all the pain, all the feelings of loss of faith in our democracy. But to be very literal, are we counting the ballots accurately? And we are. And how do we know it? Because we have audits, professional audits. And so we can always come back to that. I'm going to be clear, I support audits. just not audits that are, with preconceived notions done by people who have a certain political perspective and are done by people who are not professionals.
Hi, Kanie Freechild with Public Citizen. Thank you all for your incredible service to our country in your respective states and counties. I have a hard question that's on the cutting edge, I think, which is that AI is going to make disinformation hyper powerful and allow people who are being influenced to think they're talking to a real person that's been trained on hate or been trained on disinformation. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about how you and we as people who care about democracy can potentially use the tool to partly get out ahead of it, in addition to, I hope, pursuing regulation as we are.
I think we have to start by just talking about it more. And it needs to be center stage in our planning for 24 and beyond. And we're starting to do that in Michigan and looking at the solutions, but I'm a sort of academic by training as well, and we just got to start with data collection, understanding of all the potential problems, all the potential vulnerabilities, all the potential benefits, if you could see sort of positive use of it. And just kind of, we have not, I believe, as a community, spent enough time and energy and space having these conversations, and that's what we have to start doing.
Yeah, despite my name, I don't have great insight on this question.
We need a regulatory framework. So when I was head of the ACLU in Maine, we had a legislator introduce a ban on drones. We knew that drones were not going to be banned in Maine, but we started the conversation and we were successful in passing legislation to prohibit law enforcement drone surveillance of First Amendment protected protest activity, because that was the goal. And so I think thinking through what is the regulatory framework to protect civil liberties, the First Amendment, and our elections, because it's deeply, deeply alarming, especially in the environment that we're in with less self-regulation by social media companies than there was in 2020 as we work to combat disinformation.
Hi, Chris Piper with the Elections Group. I want to thank all of you for being so open about the treatment or therapy, what you've done. In 2021, I was administering the Virginia election. I knew that the outcome would determine most likely whether I would continue in the position. I came home to my wife a few days before the election and I said, I think I need to start therapy again. She goes, well, why? And I said, because I'm going to need it if I don't get to do this job for the next 4 years, and I'm definitely going to need it if I stick around for the next 4 years. So I thank you, but the question I have beyond therapy, because therapy can be expensive, and everybody that serves as an election administrator is dealing with some sort of trauma. But I would love to hear from each of the panelists what you do beyond therapy to take care of yourself. I know Secretary Benson's a runner. I also am a runner. Meditation and mindfulness has been a key for me. But I would just think it would be great to hear what else you're doing beyond therapy.
This community is a really key piece to supporting all of us. And I ran a half marathon on Saturday wearing a T-shirt that Secretary Benson made for me that says Democracy Defenders, which I know she made for Secretary Toulouse Oliver and a few others. So I think that is really important. These events are an important opportunity to come together, to share best practices, to share learnings, to share strategies for the future.
I would just say, and I don't mean to make light of the serious issues that you're raising, Chris, but you get to live in Maine, so that's therapy too. True. One of my favorite places, as you know.
For me, I also do, quite a bit of exercise, and I've also sort of returned back to my more artistic endeavors, whether that's just like a stupid doodle on my notepad, or taking a pottery class. I'm just trying to figure out ways to sort of come back to who I am and rediscover who I am. It's a constantly changing thing, and it's a wonderful distraction from work.
Yeah, and for me, obviously, you guys know some of what I'm doing, but also I love hiking. We have beautiful mountains right within the city of Phoenix where I live. Love getting out there. It clears my mind. I find prayer is also very helpful through all of this, and just spending time with my family and being silly, with my daughters when they'll, let me hang around with them. All those things are great, and that's what we have to remember. We are, and I've said it before, but we are not robots. We're not bureaucrats. We're people who are trying to do a job, and if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to do the best possible job for our constituents.
Yeah, and I ran a marathon last weekend, and I say that to say, I used to run 2 a year. After 2019, I was only able to do 1, I'm sorry, it sounds weird, but I'm trying to get to is from 2019 until the spring of 2021, I didn't do any races because of COVID and all that stuff. But when I started running, when I ran another one in 21, and then I just won this one and I did one in 2022, and then I just did this one. Every time I do it, yes, it's running and all that stuff, but it actually is like a definition of who I am. It reminds me who I am. And it reminds me of another community, the running community, which is incredibly supportive and amazing. And I was telling someone the other day when I was talking about the race, it was excruciating. It was the hardest one I've ever done. But I was there with thousands of other people who are all going through the same thing, and we were helping each other out, and we were supporting each other, and we were fighting through it, and we got to the other side, and then we succeeded. And it is very much a metaphor for our battle over democracy right now. And what it helps me do, and why I think we all have to find the thing that helps us do this, is my point, is it helps me redefine who I am in the midst of a environment where everyone else is trying to define me and my work and our work product for us in a way that's false, in a way that's malicious, in a way that comes through threats and other ways. It's a way for us to reclaim who we are and to remind ourselves of our power to define who we are, even in response to all of these stressors and pressures. And that's how we get through it. And that's how we keep going. So my advice is to find whatever it is, or other ways to sort of define yourself and remind yourself who you are at your core, because becoming attuned to that, proud about that, and focused on that is actually how we fight our way through the sea of noise when everyone, including the former president of the United States, is trying to define us in a way that's not true, or our work and our elections. And that's how we also reclaim our power to define what democracy really is, what our work really is, what our election protection work really is. And if we can do that for voters and actually say, no, actually, this is the truth, your vote is secure. And we're gonna fight as hard as we've ever fought for anything, every election, to make sure you can have confidence that when you vote, your vote's gonna be counted and you can trust the results of the election. Like, that's our job, that's our duty, that's our responsibility, and we become more emboldened to do that as we take care of ourselves.
I think that is an outstanding place to draw this to a close. Do you agree, Mr. Becker? Thank you to all of you so much for telling your stories and sharing your insights and experiences with this group.